John Bishop here live in Pittsburgh. Things getting ready to wind down on this shoot-around / media day prior to the first and second rounds of the tournament. But, of course, the big news back in Nebraska just can't get away from all the changes going on in Nebraska athletics. Troy Dannen, the now former athletic director at Washington and Tulane, is the new athletic director at Nebraska, replacing Trev Alberts. But Dannen leaves after just 5 months on the job. But it was a very action-packed and decision-filled 5 months. And to join us with a perspective from the other side of the story, Chris Fetters from Dogman.com, member of the 24/7 Sports Network, covering the Washington Huskies, joins us on the 42 Degrees The Source hotline. Chris, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you doing?
Doing great.
How shocking was the news today, considering Dannen just had to execute a new coaching hire? In fact, one of his first assignments was to try to keep Kalen DeBoer, which he eventually lost to Alabama. Then he goes out, hires Jed Fish. He's also fired a basketball coach, and Washington's transitioning into a new lead. How shocking was today's news?
Well, the news was very, very shocking for a number of reasons. You mentioned that they just let go Mike Hopkins after 7 years of Mike being the head coach for men's basketball. They were in the process of hiring a new coach. Presumably, if you read the tea leaves, if you go to X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, it sounded like the Utah State head coach, Danny Sprinkle, had all but agreed to become Washington's head coach. Now that's completely gone. I have to assume. I wouldn't expect a coach of Sprinkle's, his ability to go to a place without a head coach or without an athletic director there. So I would have to expect they are probably starting from scratch on that. But in terms of it being a shock, I mean, you look at it this morning, Pete Thamel reports it. It's about 7:15 or so in the morning Pacific time. I'm woken up to it. I look around. I go on X. I check everything out. There was nothing in place, either on the Nebraska side or the Washington side, that would have told us that Troy Dannen was coming there. I have found out since that apparently this was agreed upon about 4 o'clock our time this morning. So you can tell. And the crazy thing about it is that Dannen was in Palm Springs last night, so that would be Tuesday night, with the president of the university, Anna Marie Talsay, and Jed Fish, the new football coach that he hired. And he was down there at a major donor event called Dogs in the Desert. And literally that thing wrapped up, I think, around 6, 7 o'clock last night. And I have to expect that right after that happened, Dannen was in the middle of trying to finalize this deal at Nebraska. So all this stuff happened so quickly, but you don't see anything on X and everything is like that. Okay, social networks can be hit and miss. You just never know. You get a lot of good breaking news there. But then I also looked at the Nebraska 24/7 site. Obviously, we looked on our site. Nothing was leaking out. And if the demographics are similar for both schools, you'll get a mix of regular fans, hardcore fans, but you'll also get donors, deep pocket guys, well-connected guys on both sides. There was a thread on the Nebraska 24/7 site, guys, about the AD hot coach, their coaching board. It went 11 pages long without one mention of Troy Dannen. So to say that this thing came out of left field would be incorrect. This thing came from behind the bleachers. This was so this was beyond shocking in that regard. But taken as a whole, is anything really shocking anymore, guys? With all the changes that you guys have gone through in Lincoln, is anything shocking anymore, really?
Chris, that's a great point. Now, that leads into my question. That was going to be, what did you have in mind for him in terms of like career advancement? The further we get now away from Trev Alberts moving on to Texas A&M, a lot of the people behind the scenes will tell you, like, yeah, not surprised that he left, maybe surprised for where he left, but not surprised. But the timing of it is maybe what caught us off guard, and he was on the job for 2.5 months. Obviously, Troy Dannen, much different situation. It wasn't even a half year. What kind of career advancement were you expecting from him? Because obviously the timing of this is much sooner than anyone would have expected.
Well, I didn't have to expect anything, guys. You can take Troy Dannen's own words at his initial press conference when he was announced as Washington's athletic director. He said, "This is my third job. This is where I want to be. This is it. This is my last stop." He basically all but said this is going to be the last place he's ever going to be an athletic director. So you guys tell me. I mean, I understand there's politics involved in this. You can't be naive about it. But at the same time, I mean, if you take the guy's words at face value, and that press conference was literally the first, last, and only time I met Troy Dannen. I was not there. I was working off site when they hired Ted Fish for that press conference. I was not there when Troy Dannen was there, but I literally got a chance to meet Troy once, and we had like a little 10-15 minute on the side where I was able to ask him some questions and stuff. He came away as genuine, outgoing, engaging. Everything you would have expected Washington to hire in a new athletic director, considering their last athletic director, Jen Cohen, was all of that and 10 times more. And one of the big reasons why she ended up going to USC, because she was extremely coveted. She was on the playoff committee board. She was on NCAA boards. She was just a very, very competent athletic director. And we didn't expect Washington to hire anybody less than that when she decided to go to USC. So Dannen fit the bill in all sorts of ways. And so there was an expectation that he would be there probably as long as he wanted to be there. And that absolutely turned out to be true. We just didn't know it was going to be 167 days.
Chris Fetters of Dogman.com, 24/7 Sports, covering Washington, joining us on the 42 Degrees The Source hotline. You just mentioned the previous athletic director leaving for USC. This is the second time in a half a year that Washington is replacing an AD who's not only leaving them, but leaving them for a conference rival. Of course, Washington and USC have long been conference rivals, but now Washington transitioning to the Big Ten. Does that say anything? And does that say anything about the optics of these last few months, about what it's like around Washington, that they can lose two athletic directors to rival schools within the course of a half a year?
Well, sure. Everybody on the outside would say, yeah, Washington is a stepping stone. You know, anybody that wants to get on a good job, but with career advancement, you can go up further up the ladder if you do well at Washington. That feels like the tier that they're at right now, because Jen Cohen left USC. It's a private institution. She has a much bigger budget. She's getting paid more money. And ironically enough, she's doing exactly what Dannen did too, in going home. That's Jen Cohen's from that area. She spent a ton of time at Washington. She really became, she really kind of ingratiated herself within the Washington community because she spent so much time there, went to school in the Puget Sound region. She did all the right things. And so now you look at Troy Dannen. Troy Dannen's leaving for roughly, he's getting paid 1.6 base now. He was getting paid $1 million at Washington with escalators. But the buyout is 6 times what it was at Washington, for instance. He's going back to an area that I guarantee his family would rather be at, as opposed to Seattle. They're going back to the Midwest because that's his Iowa roots. That's the area he's from. And so you see a lot of situations and a lot of similarities where what happened with Cohen also happened with Dannen. The only difference is that Cohen really laid roots in Seattle. Her kids grew up there, left to go to school, all those things. She really went through the full cycle, whereas Troy Dannen, as you guys have noted, he hadn't even been here 6 months. I mean, we should have taken it as a telltale sign that his family never fully moved up to Seattle. But the reality was, when he said, hey, I've got kids in school down there, they're in the middle of their school year down in New Orleans, it makes sense for me to be able to kind of, go back and forth with my job obligations while they're finishing everything up, sell the house, and then we can fully move. All that stuff made perfect sense. What we didn't realize was that he was doing a dual housing search at the same time. He was looking at Seattle, and then he was looking at Lincoln, apparently.
Yeah, Chris, along those lines, I wanted to ask you, does this move say more about what kind of job Washington is, or what type of job Nebraska can be? But I mean, the more I hear you talking, the more that I do research into Troy Dannen, the more I wonder, is this just a guy that really wants to be in the Midwest?
Oh yeah. You guys don't know me from Adam, but I try to not complicate the simple. I try to keep things as reasonable as possible. And the simple matter of the fact is, Troy Dannen made no bones about his Midwest roots. I mean, when Kalen DeBoer was at Washington and Troy Dannen got hired, obviously after DeBoer, it was a big thing where it was like, hey, we have a lot in common. We're both Midwest guys. We get it. It's just there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of understanding there. And so it just made sense. He really laid into his Midwest roots. No one was really thinking strange things about that at the time because there was no reason to. It's just that's where he's from. I mean, why wouldn't he be proud of where he's from? It makes sense, right? So there's that. But then the other thing is that if you can go to another place and get paid more money and you're closer to your family and they want to be there, they're not moving to a brand new situation on the West Coast where, frankly, they don't have any roots. It doesn't, for me, just looking at it in a vacuum, I don't see it as being an issue at all. And I certainly don't see it as an indictment on Washington at all, because if anything, when you look at Jen Cohen leaving, you look at Troy Dannen leaving, you look at Kalen DeBoer leaving when he did after being in the national championship game, all this does is it for prospective coaches, prospective administrators, anybody that has a thought about Washington, all they're seeing is one thing. Not only is that a place where I can have a ton of success at, but there's not a cap on my upward mobility in terms of my profession. I can achieve all my goals professionally and personally there. And then if I want to move up, if there are other opportunities that are enticing to me, or that I've really, kind of the brass ring type thing, if there's anything out there for me, I can achieve that if I go to Washington first. So yes, is there a stepping stone element to that? 100%. But there's also the element to that if you're like a Heather Tarr, for instance, Washington's longtime softball coach, it's her alma mater. She's won a national championship at Washington. She's become part of the USA softball structure for the national team, like a big part of that. You can achieve all your dreams and more if you want to go to Washington too. So you can have it either way. And I think that's ultimately, if I'm a Washington fan, that's how I'd be looking at it. I'd be looking at it, yeah, it's not great that they can't hold on to people, but that mobility seems to be kind of part and parcel of what we're dealing with in the NIL era and the portal era. This is happening with coaches and administrators as much as it's happening with players.
Chris Fetters, dogman.com, covering Washington athletics for 24/7 Sports. The Midwestern stuff aside, the 60% pay increase inside, if Dannen had been successful in either keeping Kalen DeBoer, or if Alabama, let's say Nick Saban either doesn't retire or they go a different direction, if Kalen DeBoer is still the head coach at Washington, do you think we would still be having this conversation today?
Boy, that's a great question. That really is the question to ask, too, because if Nebraska fans are kind of interested more of a perspective on Dannen from someone who dealt with him more firsthand than I did, you guys should you should Google 93.3 FM KJR, because in about an hour our time here, so it'll be about 3 o'clock West Coast, so I'm assuming a little after 5 your guys' time, the main guy there, a guy named Dave Softy Mahler, is going to have quite the, I wouldn't say expose, but he's going to have some thoughts on Dannen. And I wonder if Dannen was long for this job anyways. I really wonder. I mean, I've been hearing things, and as a reporter and as a journalist, I'm taught to really investigate these things and not give hearsay a lot of full weight. But the more I hear and the more some of these thoughts get corroborated by people that I trust and I know, it sounds like Dannen was trying to ruffle some feathers in the athletic department. And I don't know if he was doing that because he thought it needed to happen, and so he was trying to do it in a good way, or if it was just kind of my way or the highway. That I don't know. And that's what we're trying to kind of get to the bottom of a little bit. And I do have a feeling Softy's going to have some takes on this in about an hour, and they're probably not going to be very positive takes if you're a Nebraska fan looking for some validation. But again, you could also look at that and go, well, that's just kind of jilted boyfriend type stuff, right? I mean, that's like, yeah, that's, if you got stood up, if you're the one sitting there, wondering what the heck just happened because your girlfriend went over and decided to hang out with that guy. Sometimes you're a little raw, and sometimes you've got some hard feelings about it. So you could take it for a grain of salt as well. But I do know that Softy had dealt with Dannen a number of times, firsthand experiences. And so he'll tell you how it is. He won't, it'll be unvarnished for sure.
Chris, so, I mean, along those lines, the question that I think a lot of Husker fans are, of course, wanting to know is, like, what is Nebraska getting as an athletic director? I wonder if you feel, this decision to leave so soon aside, Do you even feel like you're able to answer that question given how long that he was up there in Seattle?
Well, it's interesting because, you hear that side of things that, maybe he was trying to shake up the athletic department for better or for worse. Who knows? I mean, I don't know what Nebraska's departmental structures like for their athletic department, but under Troy Dannen, if you look at, if you can go in the GoHuskies.com, you can look at the list in their staff directory. You look at deputy athletic directors, senior associate athletic directors, and associate athletic directors. There's 18 of them. And maybe that was just part of the structural thing that just needed to change. Maybe there were some longtime people that needed to get blown out of there because they needed to come to the realization that they need to get with the era. Because one thing that Dannen really harped on, he harped on recruiting, he harped on NIL. He wanted to make sure that obviously the program was extremely well funded, football first, or at least the revenue sports first. And so he said all the right things in his initial press conference you would have loved to hear if you're a Washington fan. So if you're a Nebraska fan, you're going to hear a lot of those same things. I can't tell you, like you guys said, 167 days. I can't tell you. Jury's out in Seattle as far as whether or not these things that he talked about are going to take hold. But what I can tell you that are absolute facts, and they're not in dispute because they've happened, is that he hired probably arguably the best available head coach in Jed Fish in the coaching search 48 hours after Kalen DeBoer left for Alabama, and Washington was left holding the bag going, wait a second, we're literally 2 days removed from playing in a national championship game, and now you're gone? It's like, what? When has that ever happened? I mean, guys, 3 of the 4 head coaches for the teams that played in the playoff last year are gone.
Yeah.
Does that make them stepping stone programs? Of course not. But what it does mean is that anybody can be poached at any time for any amount of money and for any reason. And so right now, if you're in Nebraska, and I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know, you're stuck in steaming. I mean, I'm a heathen in Seattle, guys, but even I know that Trev Albert's leaving Nebraska for Texas A&M. What kind of heresy is that? That's ridiculous. So, who can make heads or tails of all these things? But I do know that Dannen's closer to home. He got Jed Fish hired, which was monstrous for Washington. And he let Mike Hopkins go, which appeased a lot of the basketball deep pockets guys because they knew that he needed to be gone probably at least last year, maybe even the year before, but they couldn't because of their own financial restrictions and money issues that they had going on at that time post-COVID. So it's just, there was a number of things that happened, but in terms of the major decisions that Dannen needed to get right, especially coming right out of the gate, not having a lot of time to even suck in some oxygen, let alone making these huge decisions. Both the decisions he made were considered very popular at the time. So that's all I can tell you.
Chris Fetters, dogman.com. Well, Chris, we hope that Washington continues to stay relevant in the conversation because we would love to have you back to actually talk about Washington football at some point. But we really appreciate your insight on this because I can only imagine what the folks there are thinking today, given the news, especially if he literally was at a booster function last night and then accepted the job at 4:00 this morning. And then everyone found out at 7:00 this morning.
I was going to say, as we all know, Nick Saban was interviewing coaches the day he left.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
true.
Like,
great point.
Exactly. So who knows what the heck goes. All I know is that the only other layer that could have been added to this carousel would have been if Nebraska and Washington were actually playing this year. That would have been crazy.
Absolutely.
That is not happening. So as far as we know.
Yeah.
With the Big Ten.
Big Ten championship game.
Yeah. In basketball, it will be, I'm assuming, but who knows?
Yes. Chris Fetters of dogman.com. Chris, again, thanks for the insight. We really appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Chris.